Hey everybody, Coach here. Speaking metaphorically, we are going to talk about the royal family of landscape plants this week. We are talking about the kings and queens, those being our trees and shrubs, and what we read about more than anything are the prince and princesses of our landscape. We always see a lot more tabloid and written and video about the prince and princesses. This week's landscape prince and princesses are perennials. Hands down, my favorite landscape plants. So, glad you're here with me for a few minutes. Let's get started. Let Maestro put down the bleeding heart and roll that brief intro. Hey, I'm Matt, you can call me Coach. Every Friday I bring you landscape DIY education, pro tips, landscape design concepts and theories in a hopefully easy to understand format so that you guys can tackle landscape projects yourself. Learn a little bit while you're watching my ugly mug and become a lot more self-reliant in this day and age. Get the landscape professional results you want and save a boatload of money in the process. Glad you're here. I've been in the biz for well over 20 years, and in that time I bring with me a lot of knowledge and experience that I want to impart with you, the new, modern, self-reliant, educated homeowner of today. A very consistent landscape theme that I did almost without fail throughout my designing career and my construction career was the heavy use of perennials. Hardy perennials, those plants that live 5 to 7 years, and I use these in the form of fillers in the landscape. Now, landscape designing became kind of like just another day at the office for me, and it was very easy for me to design out trees and shrubs, irrigation and drainage, water features and lighting. That stuff was the easy part. Towards the end, I really loved exploring and using perennials as fillers in those landscapes that I designed. And when I say fillers, check out this video right here on spacing. Spacing is so important, and what the perennials did in the spacing concept of landscape design was they filled in as the shrubs and trees got their hold and started doing their thing. The perennials would fill in those spaces and voids in the landscape and make the landscape look fuller quicker. Now, one thing that I saw a lot of competition doing back in the day, and that was they tried to wow their customers at times by overplanting. Instead of putting in 1 shrub, they put in 3 shrubs. Instead of 5 shrubs, they put in 12 shrubs. And the customers would go, oh wow, look how nice and full it looks. And they got their money's worth. Until about 2 to 3 years down the road when they were going out there and literally having to rip plants out of the ground that they paid for, because things were way overcrowded, plain and simple. They were just overplanted. Not only is it ugly as it starts to get older and overgrown, but it's not good for the plants either. If you have a plant that's supposed to be 3 feet by 3 feet and it's slammed together 18 inches apart, well, eventually it's not going to be the plant that it's meant to be and how it's supposed to look. So, my tact on this, and thank you J.C. Burns, my mentor from decades ago. He taught me about spacing, and then he taught me about fillers. And filler plants are what I still preach today. You know, if you select the right perennials and you put them in the right place under the right conditions, that smaller 18-inch by 18-inch perennial fills in just right between those 2 barberry. Or that 24 by 24-inch perennial fills in wonderfully in between the arborvitae and the juniper that's filling in underneath. Whatever it might be, whatever it was. And I found that it was a much quicker and easier way for a customer to see my efforts, and they got a heck of a reward from it. They not only got the landscape bones, those kings and queens of the landscape they have, but then they got all these prince and princesses that were coming into their own and blooming throughout the season. And it's very important to learn about perennials a little bit. And you can do that just by doing this nowadays. For me, it was always about turning pages and reading books. But now you can look at them in just a drop of a hat, and you can figure out which ones would go well at your back fence, or go well underneath the pine tree, or would go well out front by the Japanese maple. Those are easy, and they're easy to take care of too. Another added bonus, and many people don't consider this when they think about perennials. The added bonus is you get free plants. That's right, free plants. If you have a particular herbaceous perennial or a mass-rooted type of perennial, and I'll use one of my favorites called tick seed or Coreopsis as an example. Man, after 2 or 3 years, you can go in there in the wintertime and dig that thing up, divide it into 3s, put 1 back in, and you got 2 new free plants that you can do what you want to do with. You can propagate it somewhere else in your landscape. You can give 1 to a neighbor who's admired it for the past 2 years. You can hand 1 off to a son or daughter or a family member, whatever you want to do. And they're free. And how easy was that? With a little bit of care and a little bit of patience, all of a sudden that plant paid for itself in a couple of years. When shopping for perennials, I highly suggest that you really start planning it out in the late winter. And when I say late winter, that's kind of a varying term depending on where you live. But let's just say let's go February, March, and April. How's that? Depending on where you live. That's when you're doing your planning. You're saying, hey, I want to get a few of those, 2 of those, 7 of these, blah, blah, blah. And now you wait for the availability at your retail outlet to come into vogue. And usually down in the South, you're going to see it in February, mid-country or mid-globe, March and April. And then up in the northern latitudes, you'll see it in late April, May, and into June. Now you can go out there and find them. And if you can't find them at the retail nursery, they can always order them for you, provided that the availability at the wholesale level is there. What I used to find on some really popular perennials, hostas would be one, tick seed, Rudbeckia, those kind. A wholesaler in the area would grow 2,000 of them in a gallon can. And all of a sudden they came into color bloom and the wholesalers couldn't keep them in the yard. They would go whoosh, out into the retail world and they were gone. And their next crop would be another month or 6 weeks down the road, if at all. Because maybe they just bought in 1,000. Perennials are kind of priced in the same range as, your shrubs, nowadays anyway. Sometimes you can find them on sale, but most of the time you're gonna find them in gallon cans and 4-inch pots and on occasion, six-pack, cell pack types. I've seen ones like Bidens and Echinacea. Those I've seen in cell packs. And your prices are going to range anywhere from, depending on your location, the real swank nurseries and the swank neighborhoods might be $10 for a gallon can, and maybe $6 to $7 for a 4-inch pot, and maybe about $5 for a cell pack. All depends on where you're at and what's available. The further away those plants have to come to that nursery, the more it's going to cost because of shipping, plain and simple. And that is a heck of a lot more. That is almost, I would say, close to triple the cost that when I was first exposed to them in the nursery business back in the 70s. The 1970s, okay? Not the 1870s for you smart asses out there, or my kids if they happen to be watching, okay? 1970s. Perennials can be found for full blazing sun, they can be found for deep shades, and they can be found for part sun locations. They're so varied. And the reason I brought this to you is because I'm enjoying the United States right now in the Appalachian Mountains, and spring is in full thrust right now. And I'm seeing all kinds of native perennials out here that are just gorgeous. Some are blooming, some are starting to bud up. We found a beautiful, beautiful wild lady slipper orchid today, actually 2 of them. And man, they're different. They're not like your ornamental yards. I mean, this is where Ma Nature and the guy upstairs has done their magic out here, and they're just now coming in. And I said, well, what better time to revisit and talk about perennials that we can access and put in our own yards. The care of perennials is almost easier than shrubs and trees. Everything And I mean everything success related for perennial planting has to do with that hole you put it in. The preparation you take, the types of soils you're putting it in, and your attentiveness to what that perennial needs as far as a successful place to grow. Sun, water, food, and soil. If you create that right environment, you know, it is going to thrive for you. If you go out there with a shovel on a Saturday afternoon, slam it in some heavy clay soil and go, okay, now go, baby, probably not going to get it. 50-50 mix of native soils, starter organic fertilizers, maybe a little bit of synthetic fertilizer for the first couple, 3 months to get that root system going, and then stand back. I always ended up tending them. Once they were established, I would tend them probably about 4 times a year. Deadheading, feeding, mulching, and dividing. You know, not necessarily in that order, but that's generally what the chores were, about 4 times a year, whatever, you know, whatever the plant called for. And yes, I've made my own mistakes with perennials as well. When I was a noob in the horticultural business, I can remember wanting to plant some plants that attracted hummingbirds and butterflies. And we had some at the nursery called Salvia greggii. Fantastic little hummingbird attractor, and I said, good, they're in 4-inch pots just getting going, I'm going to get 5. And I took them and I put them in my first house, and the end of the year I had a forest. And boy, did I have hummingbirds though. Holy crap, those little hummers came in on that salvia more than anything I've ever seen yet, except Catalpa tree. Don't forget Catalpa. But anyway, I had to go back in and do the old thinning, and I thinned them down to 2 out of 5. I had to take 3 of them out of there because they just grew so fast, and I did not pay attention at a young age of what the mature size was. I was going for the look at the time of planting. So something to keep in mind. Remember the mature size. The other thing is remember your planting plan. When you're planting, you know, on your own out there, consider, you know, tall in the back or tall in the center. Those fillers can, you know, you get a little Patriot hosta and you're putting it in a morning sun situation, you know, they're going to get maybe 24 by 24 inches in the first 5 years or so. So don't slam them together and plant them 18 inches apart. Remember that they go down in the front of the morning sun bed and not in the back, and you have something big in front of it. You know, that's silly. So remember your planting plan and lay it out just like you did your trees and shrubs. And if you get super bored in the wintertime, the doldrums of winter, you can always order perennials in seed online or even down at the nursery. They'll have some available, but then you can get yourself a tray and some potting soil, plant them up, heat them up, put them under a grow light, and get them to germinate just like your veggies in late winter. And then you can transplant them out into the landscape later in the spring. It's a great way to stay involved in your landscape in the wintertime and also involve the kids on a snowy or rainy day. So, you know, many of the perennials that I've used, some of my favorites, I'd like to share with you. And I'm sure many of you who are as versed or even more versed in perennials than I am, you'll recognize them right away. But some of you may not, and maybe you want to check them out, okay? So here they are in the importance to me for color, longevity, lower maintenance, performance, and the capability of being divided later on. Those are kind of what I round out my favorites with. So let's start with sunny locations first, shall we? One of my all-time favorites that I discovered probably about, I don't know, a dozen years ago is Dwarf Bidens. Bidens have become a very popular low-maintenance type of perennial that really do perform well. They have a very long blooming season, and even that season can be extended out further with just a little bit of shearing and a little bit of haircut here and there. I will tell you, Bidens do, if you don't deadhead them really well, they do go to seed, and they will sprout right underneath the parent plants. So be aware of that. But Bidens are a great way to front a bed, nice low growing, you know, probably 15 inches or less. And if you have retaining walls or boulders, they will get full enough to where they start to spill a little bit. A nice cascading yellow tapestry right over a retaining wall or boulders. Very nice. Another one, and I mentioned it earlier, Coreopsis, or commonly called tick seed. There's all kinds of varieties out there right now, and I love the shorter ones. Early Sunrise is a great one, but it requires a little more maintenance. I really like Moonbeam and Rosea, some of the tighter, more dwarf ones. Those are the ones that I like. But you know, you can see some of these varieties that I'm showing you right now. They're a fantastic, hardy, long-term performer in the growing season that you can really use and then divide and transplant if you want. One of my other ones, this one comes into vogue when the other ones are starting to get tired, and that's Rudbeckia, or Black-Eyed Susan. And they are also a warm season, warm palette type of flower. You can get them in oranges and reds and yellows, and I love the single ones where that dark center is in the middle of the flower. I love Rudbeckia. It does not like super wet feet, but it performs very well in the heat of late summer and into autumn. A fantastic one. And following right on its shirt tails is Aster. Aster comes in right about the same time, and I love combining those two. Asters are a cool palette, so you can use those as a contrast. Usually shorter than Rudbeckia, so Rudbeckia in the back and Asters in the front. Fantastic look to them. And rounding out my sunny locations is Monarda, Bee Balm, Veronica, Speedwell, Salvia, like I told you about hummingbird attractors, and Liatris or Gay Feather. Those guys are fantastic, and you don't see them all the time. So they're really a nice, hey, what kind of flower is that type of conversation piece. All right, moving on to part sun and shade. Go for the hostas. Japanese painted fern, one of my favorite perennial ferns ever. My God, the looks of those ferns when they first come out in the springtime with the silver and greenish burgundy look to them, a fantastic shady complementary thing with hostas and azaleas and rhodies and hydrangea. Fantastic. Again, down in front, okay? And rounding out some of my shady favorites is Dicentra, Bleeding Heart, Brunera, especially Queen of Hearts. I love that plant. Oh my God. I have a love affair with Brunera. I did it. Take a look at this plant right here, okay? Because that was plant of the week back in the fall, I believe. And I found that where? Missoula, Montana, of all places. Yeah. Queen of Hearts Brunera, a fantastic plant. Columbine and Astilbe. Those are my shady morning sun type of perennials that I think are just fantastic. And deadheading those, you can get secondary and even third blooming cycles. Not quite as big as the primary, but they still perform well. Perennials are a very versatile plant. They can be placed obviously out in the garden, but they can also be a container plant depending on your variety. You can have not just landscape filler plants, but you can create whole tapestries of perennials. Very cottage garden theme type of a perennial garden, or a centerpiece in the middle of a large lawn. And when I say centerpiece, large lawn, I mean something that's 25 feet long by 15 feet deep. Make a splash if you have that kind of space. It will be fantastic. It will be the kind of thing that when everything comes in, people are slowing down on the road to go, oh, look at that. Isn't that pretty? That's the kind of statements that perennials make. And like we spoke about earlier, perennials are the most economical landscape plant you can use. For division purposes, you get free plants, but they also last quite a while. You know, no, they're not the hedgy type of plant in any way. They have a lifespan of about 5 to 7 years max. But by dividing them and putting the original back in its hole, you will revive it like it's been reborn. And the other ones will be the same way. And again, start fresh with a new planting hole, new soils, fertilizers all over again. And you can extend the life of that perennial several years. What I always suggest is use your own imagination. But if that's broken, go online and look at Google and Pinterest, and oh my God, all you gotta do is type in, you know, summer perennial bloomers and then stand back and go, okay, now I'm totally overwhelmed, but I have a lot to choose from. And you can see other people's work, and there's no better flattery than plagiarism by taking those things and bring them to life in your yard. So, you know, be creative. You know, take a few minutes at nighttime or on the morning, a Saturday morning, say in now and grab yourself a cup of coffee, go to the nursery and educate yourself. And if you can't get the answers right here on your phone while you're looking at a particular perennial, turn around and ask the pros that work there. They would love just to spout their knowledge to you, and then buy the plant there, okay? Don't go run down to Walmart and buy the plant if Walmart even has it. Okay, so patronize the people that educate you, okay? The best success I ever had with perennials was following a fertilizing program that always started out with Stone starter fertilizer. Now, no, I'm not sponsored by them. It just happens to be the products that I've used. Stone starter fertilizer for the planting hole. I did a little bit of Miracle Grow at half strength for the first 3 months, and then it would fall into that 4 times a year category where I would use dry fertilizers and scratch in and around the perennial. They always seem to do very well for me. I hope they do well for you as well. Hey, I got a favor to ask of you. If you have a favorite perennial or one that has performed very well for you, maybe it was one that I mentioned, or maybe it's one that I did not mention, I'd love for you to send me a picture of it. Or drop it down in a comment below. Say, hey, check out blah, blah, blah. I think you'll like that one too. I love researching and learning new stuff all the time. And that's what I've learned back here in the Appalachian Mountains. We're gonna go take a couple pictures of that lady slipper orchid, something I would never have thought that I would have stumbled across. And if you guys would really like to bolster your landscape education, hey, do me a favor, support the old codger here and go to the website, youryardcoach.com. We always put it right there. Check out the book, Landscaping Simplified, and check out the digital course, Homescape 1.0. A fantastic way to bolster all the landscape education that you would need to take on a landscape project yourself. I guarantee it. Well, that's what I have today. The prince and princesses of the residential landscape, those perennials. Man, I sure do love them. And I can't wait to find some more native ones right here in the mountains of Georgia. I will catch you guys next Friday, every Friday. Go out there and get those hands dirty. Put something in the ground constructively and enjoy it. It's a wonderful, cathartic, leisurely hobby that you get great returns on. I'll catch you guys next Friday, guys. Bye for now.